by meeting a leading authority on the subject, Dr. Atom.
Quando o monumento a George Washington ficou pronto aqui na capital americana, os arquitetos resolveram colocar lá em cima uma ponta feita com um novo tipo de metal, caríssimo, recentemente viu na sua forma mais pura. Isso aconteceu em 1884. E a pequena pirâmide continua lá, no topo da estrutura. São 3 quilos de puro alumínio. É, exatamente o material das latas de cerveja de hoje.
And the Emperor Napoleon III had a special set of aluminum knives and forks that he would give his most favored guests. And the lesser nobility had to be content with gold knives and forks.
O alumínio, que ficou tão barato e passou a ser tão útil, é apenas um dos elementos químicos que nos cercam. Do verde das árvores até as estrelas a milhões de anos-luz da Terra, tudo é composto pelos blocos fundamentais da natureza. Até agora, nós descobrimos 118 desses elementos.
Tudo tem química. Absolutamente tudo. Não existe nada sem química.
Você vai conhecer agora as histórias e as curiosidades escondidas em um instrumento marcante da ciência, que nasceu em um sonho do seu criador, a tabela periódica. O Espaço Aberto Ciência e Tecnologia está começando. Eles são 118 hoje e no futuro poderão ser mais. Eles formam tudo o que vemos, quem somos e o que sentimos. Alguns são conhecidos desde a antiguidade. Outros foram descobertos por alquimistas na Idade Média. Os mais recentes foram fabricados pelo homem. Desde a busca pela pedra filosofal, que segundo a lenda podia transformar metais em ouro, até a descoberta das profundezas dos átomos, muito se aprendeu. Mas a ciência deve a Dmitri Mendeleev a tabela que no século XIX deu ordem às estruturas fundamentais da química. Depois de passar noites em claro buscando uma solução que juntasse por afinidade os pouco mais de 60 elementos conhecidos na época, Mendeleev achou, durante um sonho, a resposta que hoje está em qualquer sala de aula. Sam Kean é físico e autor. Escreve para revistas como a Science e acabou de lançar aqui nos Estados Unidos o livro The Disappearing Spoon, onde conta curiosidades sobre os elementos da tabela periódica. A colher que some, o título do livro, é uma velha piada entre os cientistas.
The disappearing spoon has to do actually with the element that Mendeleev predicted the properties of. It's an element called gallium.
Gallium, yeah.
And it looks a lot like aluminum. If you had a hunk of one sitting there and a hunk of the other sitting there, you probably wouldn't be able to tell them apart. Except gallium has an unusual property. It melts in your hand because its melting point is about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And the reason I call the book The Disappearing Spoon is that it's sort of a classic nerdy science prank to give somebody tea or coffee or a hot beverage with a spoon made of gallium. And of course the person getting the tea or coffee just thinks it's an aluminum spoon or something like that. But they figure out something unusual is going on when they put it in their tea or coffee and stir it, and it disappears on them.
You said in your book that the periodic table, essentially, number one, doesn't need to exist, since almost everything in the universe is made out of hydrogen and helium. And second, the periodic table, it's not a very good instrument. I mean, what do you use it for?
Well, you're right that most of the atoms in the universe, 90% of them are hydrogen, and the other 10% are helium. So basically the rest of the periodic table and the rest of the universe is a cosmic rounding error. And in that sense, the periodic table on a grand scale is a little bit useless. But of course, the ratio of elements is much different on Earth than it is in the rest of the universe. So it's very useful to us, even though, you know, in a grander sense, it might not be as important to someone who could see the entire cosmos as one.
If we understand the universe, as you just described, as made out of hydrogen and helium, 99.99999% of it, the periodic table alone, as it stands, has 118 elements nowadays. Pretty much everything that we see around us is a combination of elements other than hydrogen and helium. So let us know how much this trace elements, this very small amount of elements, can make for such a variety of things and materials and stuff around us.
Well, that's one of the really fascinating things about the periodic table, is that there is so much variety on it. You can find an element or a combination of elements that'll have pretty much any property that you want, and by putting them together, you can make such amazing things. Everything around us, we eat and breathe the periodic table. It infects every area of human life that you can think of. And one of the things I really wanted to get at in the book was sort of to move beyond just the chemistry and the normal science you think of, and show how many different areas the periodic table really does touch in people's lives.
A tabela periódica toca a vida de todos. Na escola, ela realmente pode ser a diferença entre passar de ano ou não. O professor Alcides Afonso dá aulas de química há 15 anos. Para ele, o grande desafio é tornar interessante algo que parece tão difícil.
A tabela não é um fim, a tabela é uma ferramenta, né? Daí não ter mais sentido se decorar a tabela periódica, né? A gente faz as brincadeiras, a gente faz as musiquinhas para tornar mais prazeroso para o aluno. Assim como uma pessoa canta uma música de um cantor e ela não canta para decorar a música do cantor. Ela canta para se divertir, ela canta porque é legal cantar. A tabela é importante, a tabela é uma ferramenta de grande aplicação. A tabela é um manual importante da química, o manual mais importante que a química tem. É curioso e triste também quando a gente vê algum produto, alguma indústria anunciar que o seu produto não tem química, ou tem um mínimo de química. Essa é uma visão preconceituosa e é uma visão pouco inteligente. Transmite uma informação errada. Ela é nociva às pessoas. Tudo tem química, absolutamente tudo. Não existe nada sem química. Nós somos feitos de moléculas que interagem entre si, acontecem no nosso corpo milhões de reações por segundo, reações químicas todas elas. Cada pensamento, cada sentimento, cada gesto nosso são reações acontecendo. E a tabela é a chave que abre todas essas portas. Eletroquímica é um convite para estudar.
In a universe that's made mostly out of hydrogen and helium, how come you get out of that stars, comets, solid things, nuclear reactions, nuclear fusions and all that?
Well, stars themselves are just collections of hydrogen, and it just happens that there's so much of it, and there's such high pressures on the insides of stars that they're able to take the hydrogen atoms and crush them together and form helium atoms from them. And eventually, when the star runs out of hydrogen fuel, they will take the helium atoms and crush those together. And that's how you start to accumulate a few more elements at a time. It takes smaller elements and crushes them together. You can do that process up to about iron, which is element 26. And after that, you have to go to what are called a supernova explosion. These were very, very far away, but they were so bright. And in these enormous explosions, the atoms and the elements that are there fuse together, and that's where you get most of the heavy elements on the periodic table, up to about uranium, which is element 92.
Os outros elementos foram sendo formados por fusões nucleares. é quando o núcleo de um átomo se junta com o núcleo de outro átomo e forma um núcleo maior. E aí você percebe que a tabela é organizada com um número atômico crescente e as massas vão crescendo junto com a tabela, aproximadamente, tem uma ou outra inversão, inclusive previstas por Mendeleev quando criou a tabela periódica. Esses novos elementos vão surgindo dessas fusões nucleares. Quando um núcleo se junta a outro e forma um átomo maior, surge nesse momento um novo elemento. Existem as fusões naturais, digamos assim, aquelas que acontecem no universo, e existem aquelas que são artificiais.
On Earth, what are we formed of?
We're mostly formed of carbon, which is a little unusual because an element that's related to carbon, silicon, is actually much, much more common in the Earth's crust. It just so happens that carbon is a very flexible element. You can form rings with it. You can form long chains with it. And it's just a very useful element for bonding with other things. And that's why all living creatures that we know of use carbon almost exclusively.
So evidently carbon can become organic, silicon cannot.
Silicon would have a much harder time becoming organic because it can't make rings quite in the same way. It's sort of a dream of science fiction writers that you could find silicon-based life on another planet. And it's very fascinating to think about what are the different elements that you could use to make a living creature. But it would be pretty hard to imagine something that was based on silicon.
Você vai ver no próximo bloco. Novas formas de ver o mundo transformam a tabela periódica e nos preparam para elementos que ainda nem conhecemos. Na antiguidade, os segredos de metais como o ferro e o mercúrio eram conhecidos. E na Idade Média, alquimistas investigaram as suas propriedades. Mas foi a partir do século XVIII, com o trabalho de Antoine Lavoisier, que a química se transformou em ciência.
Mendeleev put together the periodic table at the end of the mid-1800s. Evidently, elements were known way before, since Greece.
Many of the elements were known even before that. The Iron Age, the Mercury has a very ancient history as well. So there were certain elements that they knew about from a very long time ago, and over the years they accumulated a few more. Chemists in the Middle East found some, alchemists discovered a few, and then really in Europe in the 1700s is when things really started to accelerate.
And he put together a table. What was the sense of it? I mean, why not have just a list of elements, or why the table?
There are two reasons for that. One was sort of a pragmatic reason. He was a procrastinator. He was behind on a deadline.
Like all of us.
Yeah. He was behind on a deadline for a book, and he needed a quick way to summarize the information that he knew about the elements. And so he decided to come up with a table and put them in tabular form because he thought that would be easier so you could look at it at a glance. And the scientific reason to do that is because you want to know why the properties of elements repeat and when the properties of elements repeat. And the periodic table really allows you to do that. And the other thing it allowed scientists to do, Mendeleev left gaps on the table where he predicted that new elements would be found. And when new elements were discovered and when they had exactly the properties that Mendeleev predicted, people realized that it was a powerful scientific tool for discovering elements that they didn't even know existed yet. The periodic table is really the most precious real estate in all of science because there are so few spots on it, and because it's going to hang in every chemistry classroom around the entire world. And as you said, there were many scientists who had rival claims for elements. Very fierce and angry rows over who discovered some of the elements first.
Was it in the book that you referred to Mercury being responsible for the Mad Hatter's madness?
The hatters in England in the 1700s and 1800s, to get the fur off of the pelts that they made the hats out of, they would have to wash it in a bath of mercury. And it was very good about getting the hair off, but unfortunately they would breathe the fumes in, and it would cause brain damage and make them crazy.
A liquid metal is cool.
Yeah.
Next.
I think one element I didn't know anything about before I wrote the book, and that I really found a great story with, was molybdenum, which is element 42. It has a strange name, it's hard to pronounce, and I found out that it actually played an important role in World War I. The Germans, they had their big Bertha howitzers, their enormous guns
Cannons,
to shell. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there was so much heat generated with these cannons that they would get deformed and they would fall out of shape. But the Germans discovered that if they used a little bit of molybdenum in the steel, it helped the cannons keep their shape and they could shoot them more often. Unfortunately, the Germans didn't have molybdenum, and they eventually found a source of it in an abandoned mine in Colorado in the United States. And they actually sent agents over to harass the mine owners that were there so they could get their hands on the molybdenum. They took the mine over, took the mine owner and threw him off a cliff at one point.
Nice.
They were harassing his family, all to get their hands on this molybdenum. So it was sort of the most remote battle of World War I, was on this abandoned mine in Colorado.
Another element.
Another great story that I found out was aluminum, which is an element that everyone knows, of course. But back in the 1800s, when they first discovered it, aluminum was actually the most precious metal on Earth. It was worth far more than gold or silver.
Was that so?
Because it was very hard to get a pure sample of it. And a pure sample was actually considered something like a miracle. The French government used to keep Fort Knox-like bars of aluminum next to their crown jewels. And the Emperor Napoleon III had a special set of aluminum knives and forks that he would give his most favored guests. And the lesser nobility had to be content with gold knives and forks.
Folly.
Yes. And then a few people came along, an American, a Frenchman, and an Austrian, and they simultaneously figured out how to get pure samples of aluminum, and that completely crashed the aluminum market.
Then you seem to like, or at least you talk about a lot in your book, of antimony.
Antimony is another fun element. It has a very long and colorful history. It was known about in ancient times. Egyptian women, for instance, used it as a mascara.
The female symbol is close to the symbol for antimony, isn't it?
It is. The symbol for female is antimony symbol upside down. It's a circle.
A circle with a cross underneath. And
yep, and upside down. And antimony. So it's related to this very symbol for females. Egyptian women used to use it as mascara. And there are some historians who think that Nebuchadnezzar in the Bible, who made the famous Hanging Gardens of Babylon,
right,
used paint with antimony in his palace. It makes a very nice bright yellow. And he, of course, went crazy. He was sleeping outside. He was eating grass like a cow would. And there's some historians who think, well, maybe the antimony in his paint might have caused it. So there could be something to that idea. And it continues on. Antimony's history continues on through medicine and alchemy. It was very popular with physicians, and it became sort of a fad to give people antimony as a medicine. And I guess there's no real delicate way to put it. It was a very, very powerful laxative, and people would give it to sort of clear your system out.
Com quase 150 anos de existência, a tabela periódica hoje comporta praticamente o dobro de elementos que tinha quando foi criada. Nossa capacidade de criar novos elementos não só ampliou a tabela, como hoje levanta a questão: será que precisamos de uma nova forma de ordenar os elementos?
We have 118 elements today in the periodic table. How long will that last? How long are we going to have 120?
Scientists will probably discover a new element fairly soon. The most recent one was added to the table just this past spring, and it seems like every 4 to 5 years scientists are able to add another element to the table. However, it is getting harder and harder to do so. The elements along the bottom aren't discovered so much as they're created in a lab. And they're very, very fragile, and they fall apart in small fractions of a second. And scientists aren't sure how far they can keep it going. There's probably a limit to the number of elements that we'll see on the periodic table, but no one knows quite where it is yet.
O núcleo do átomo, ele tem prótons, que são partículas positivas, e tem nêutrons, que são partículas neutras, como o nome já diz. Os elétrons que estão girando em volta, numa análise bem simplista, são partículas negativas. O núcleo, por ser positivo, atrai os elétrons para si. Se o elétron cair no núcleo, é o colapso do átomo como a gente entende um átomo. Isso quer dizer que quanto mais prótons houver no núcleo, quanto maior o núcleo for, quanto mais a gente chocar átomos menores e fabricar átomos maiores com mais prótons, quanto maior essa atração, maior a velocidade que um elétron tem que ter para não cair no núcleo. Então, a sua pergunta de se há um limite para que a gente possa fazer isso, essa pergunta, na verdade, é: há um limite para a velocidade do elétron? Há. A velocidade da luz. Então, esse é o limite de criação.
We're going on 150 years almost. Isn't it time for a new periodic table, a different kind of way to correlate elements and see the properties and all that?
Well, that's one very interesting thing. There are a lot of people out there who think there are better ways to arrange the elements. We sort of have our boxy look. It looks sort of like a castle with turrets on either side. But there are people who have come up with periodic tables that have hydrogen in the center and the other elements sort of spiral around it.
The smallest atomic weight in the middle.
The first one in the middle and then the others spiral around it.
Se você gostou do programa de hoje, entre em nosso blog e mande seus comentários. O endereço é g1.com.br/globonews. Até a semana que vem, com mais um Espaço Aberto Ciência e Tecnologia.
Can't get it now, but I